Have you ever wondered what happens in the forgotten corners of America? Places so remote that maps barely acknowledge them, and where bloodlines have twisted into something unspeakable. Tonight's story isn't fiction. It isn't folklore. It is about a family hidden deep in the Appalachian mountains, a family who married each other, lived in isolation for generations, and guarded their secrets with something far darker than silence. In the quiet valleys of Appalachia, whispers of inbred clans have circulated for decades. Locals tell stories of homes with no visitors, children with unsettling faces, and screams echoing through the woods at night. But the family we are about to talk about makes those whispers real. They weren't just poor or forgotten, they were something else entirely. A family that turned its back on the world and on morality itself. What began as whispers of odd behavior soon became tales of missing travelers, strange figures lurking in the tree line, and authorities too terrified to investigate. This is not just about incest. It is about murder, secrets, and the chilling cost of bloodlines that never leave the mountain. Welcome to Appalachia's inbred horror, the family who married each other. The Appalachian mountains stretch endlessly, their ridges swallowing towns whole and their valleys hiding lives from the outside world. In the heart of these rolling, mist-covered woods lies a forgotten settlement locals call Hollow's End. Once a small coal mining community, the town collapsed decades ago when the mines shut down. Those who could leave packed up quickly, but some stayed behind, stubborn, isolated families who clung to the land. Among them was one family whose name locals refused to say out loud. To outsiders, they were simply known as the family who married each other. Generations of isolation twisted them into something unrecognizable. Cut off from doctors, schools, and the watchful eye of neighbors, they created their own world within the woods. Records of births and marriages vanished. Graves with no headstones dot the hillsides, half sunken into the dirt. Locals whisper that the family's bloodline folded in on itself so many times that their faces no longer looked quite human. Sunken eyes, uneven features, slack jaws. Rumors spread of children who never spoke, of adults who hissed at visitors instead of greeting them. But these stories were easy to dismiss as small-town gossip, until, of course, people started disappearing. The first missing persons reports were brushed aside. After all, the Appalachians are notorious for hikers who vanish without a trace. But patterns emerged. Strangers who ventured near Hollow's End were the ones who vanished most often. A drifter here, a hitchhiker there, and eventually, even locals who dared to wander too close. Some claimed they'd seen shadowy figures lurking near the tree line, watching, waiting. Others said you could hear faint laughter in the distance, not joyful laughter, but a broken, echoing sound that raised the hair on the back of your neck. Law enforcement, ill-equipped and unwilling, rarely. It was the summer of 1987 when the first case broke through the wall of whispers. A young hitchhiker named Daniel Price, only 22, vanished on his way to Kentucky. His last known stop was a gas station near the base of Hollow's End. Witnesses remembered him clearly, a tall boy with a backpack, a friendly smile, and a map tucked under his arm. He told the cashier he planned to take the scenic route through the mountains. That was the last anyone ever saw of him. Weeks passed before Daniel's family reported him missing, and the investigation barely scratched the surface. Police noted that his backpack was later found abandoned near an old service road leading into Hollow's End. What made it worse was the way it was found. Straps torn, fabric soaked in mud, and claw-like scratches running down its side. No fingerprints, no signs of robbery. Just a bag left as if to warn anyone else who might wander that way. Locals weren't surprised. In hushed tones, they admitted that Daniel wasn't the first. For years, hikers, hunters, and the occasional traveler had gone missing near the hollow, but none of those cases ever made the news. Daniel's disappearance, however, stirred attention because his family pushed harder. Flyers were plastered across towns, news outlets ran short segments, and pressure mounted on local law enforcement. But the deeper police pressed, the stranger the reports became. One deputy claimed he found footprints, but not like any humans. They were wide, uneven, dragging through the dirt as though whoever made them walked unsteadily, with a limp or deformity. Another officer swore he heard laughter in the woods during a late-night search. Laughter that didn't sound like it belonged to just one person. It echoed, warped, and seemed to come from every direction at once. The search teams reported feeling watched, their flashlights catching quick mo. Locals never spoke their name, but everyone in Appalachia knew of the family hidden in Hollow's End. Some called them the clan. Others simply whispered, "Them people." They lived in a sagging wooden farmhouse at the edge of the forest, a structure so warped and decayed it looked ready to collapse. Its windows were covered with heavy rags, and the yard was littered with rusted appliances, broken cars, and animal bones. Stray dogs barked at the property, but never dared step inside. For decades, the family kept to themselves, but their presence was impossible to ignore. They were rarely seen in daylight. On the rare occasions they ventured into nearby towns, their appearance left even hardened locals shaken. Faces marked by generations of inbreeding, sunken eyes that didn't quite look in the same direction, swollen noses, lips too thick or too thin, jaws that jutted strangely. Some children walked in jerky, staggering motions. Others muttered incomprehensible words under their breath, and most never made eye contact. Locals whispered they had their own language, guttural sounds and clicks passed down through generations, a tongue no outsider could understand. Despite their oddities, no one dared confront them, not just because of their appearance, but because of the fear they instilled. Stories circulated of hunters who strayed too close to their property, only to hear whistles echoing from the trees, whistles that moved in circles, herding the intruder deeper into the woods. More than one hunter never came back. It was the old-timers who told the darkest tales. They said the family's roots stretched back to the 1800s, when a single couple settled in Hollow's End, far removed from towns or churches. Over time, their children had children with each other, and so on, until the family tree wound in on itself like a serpent devouring its tail. Outsiders were almost ever brought in. When they were, the whispers claimed, it was not through marriage, but through abduction. By the 1980s, their numbers had dwindled. Inbreeding had taken its toll. Twisted spines, vacant stares, and minds that never matured past childhood. But what they lacked in intellect, they made up for in something darker, a primal, animal-like cunning. They knew every inch of those woods, every cave, every hidden trail. Outsiders were trespassers, and trespassers did not leave alive. To the world, Hollow's End was a forgotten place. But to the people who lived nearby, it was a shadow that hung over every day. A reminder that deep in the mountains, there was a family who had turned its back on humanity and become something else entirely. By 1991, the whispers of Hollow's End had grown too loud to ignore. After multiple disappearances, including Daniel Price, a small group of volunteer investigators decided to explore the area themselves. They weren't law enforcement, just locals and amateur sleuths, tired of watching friends and strangers vanish. Armed with flashlights, tape recorders, and a single camera, they entered the tree line leading toward the family's land. The woods grew darker with every step. Thick canopies blocked out sunlight, and the air grew damp, heavy, and suffocating. They followed the old service road where Daniel's backpack had been found, eventually stumbling upon crude signs nailed to trees, symbols carved deep into the bark, jagged spirals, and crude stick figures. One investigator swore they heard faint voices ahead, not speaking English, but guttural mutters and broken laughs. The others dismissed it as nerves, but all of them felt it, the sensation of being watched. Hours passed before they reached the clearing. There it was, the farmhouse, It looked worse up close. Boards rotting, walls sagging, and the smell of decay seeping from it, like a living thing. The group dared not step inside, but they circled the perimeter, documenting what they could. That's when they saw it. A pit dug into the yard, covered loosely with a wooden door. Beneath it, the faint smell of rotting flesh. One man lifted the door just enough to shine a flashlight inside. He screamed. Bones. Dozens of them. Human and animal tangled together, some fresh, some old. Suddenly, a whistle pierced the silence, high-pitched, warbling, coming from the woods. Then another, and another. The investigators froze. The whistling grew louder, circling them, moving through the trees as if dozens of unseen figures were closing in. Heart pounding, they backed away from the pit, from the farmhouse, from the clearing itself. One dropped the camera in the dirt. Another tripped and had to be dragged to his feet. They didn't stop running until they burst out of the tree line hours later, gasping for breath, pale as corpses themselves. They handed over what little evidence they had. A shaky tape recording of the whistles and blurred photos of the pit. Authorities called it inconclusive. But those men never returned to Hollow's End again. To this day, some of them refuse to speak about what they saw, as though even the memory might summon the family from the woods. For years, locals believed the family's cruelty was limited to inbreeding and intimidation, but the truth was far worse. In 1994, a hunter named Robert Ellis vanished while tracking deer near Hollow's End. Unlike Daniel Price, Robert wasn't an outsider. He was born and raised in Appalachia, tough, well-liked, and familiar with the woods. His disappearance rattled the community, and this time, the sheriff's department could not ignore it. A large-scale search was launched. Dozens of volunteers combed through the mountains, dogs sniffed along old trails, and helicopters circled overhead. But Robert was never found. What was discovered instead still haunts investigators to this day. Deep in the woods, searchers stumbled upon a crude underground cellar, hidden beneath rotting boards and branches. Inside, they found what appeared to be a living space, but not for animals. Human, old furniture, tattered blankets, jars filled with cloudy liquid, and crude drawings scrawled on the walls. At first glance, it looked like a survivalist's hideout. But when they looked closer, the horror revealed itself. In the corner of the cellar were cages, rusted, barely large enough to hold a person. Inside lay scraps of clothing, gnawed bones, and chains bolted into the floor. Investigators realized the family hadn't just been inbreeding. They had been capturing people. Some for breeding, others for food. Reports of cannibalism had floated around Appalachia for decades, but this was evidence that the rumors were real. The family who married each other wasn't merely a genetic tragedy. They were predators. The discovery should have led to arrests, but the family was nowhere to be found. Their farmhouse stood empty, as though abandoned overnight. Food still rotted on the table, and fires smoldered in the hearth, but no one remained inside. Authorities scoured the woods, but every trail shed. It was as though the family had melted back into the mountains. The cages, bones, and drawings were quietly sealed away in evidence lockers, never released to the public. Official reports claimed the evidence was inconclusive. Unofficially, the sheriff's office admitted they were terrified. Some believe the family was tipped off, that someone in law enforcement deliberately let them slip away. Others say the family was watching the investigators the entire time, hiding in the trees, laughing at how close they came. Whatever the truth, the disappearance of Robert Ellis exposed the darkest secret yet. Hollow's End wasn't just home to an inbred family. It was home to a family of killers. In the autumn of 1997, a story surfaced that was so terrifying most locals refused to repeat it. A young woman named Claire Dawson, a college student traveling through Appalachia, went missing after her car broke down near Hollow's End. Weeks later, she reappeared, barefoot, bruised, and half-starved, stumbling out of the forest miles from where she had last been seen. What she told investigators sounded like madness, but her body carried the truth. She had been there, inside. Claire said she was taken by figures who seemed more animal than human. Their faces were distorted, their words unintelligible, their movements jerky and inhuman. She was dragged to a cellar where others had once been kept. She described cages, chains, and the smell of rot so strong it clung to her hair and skin for days. But the worst part wasn't the cellar. It was the family itself. She claimed they lived like a pack, sleeping in piles, hissing and growling to communicate, feeding on raw meat and sometimes each other. Their eyes, she said, were the most terrifying thing. Wide, empty, as if humanity had been erased long ago. Her escape came by chance. One night, when the family erupted into chaos, screeching, fighting, clawing at one another over food, she slipped out of her cage. She ran barefoot into the woods, branches tearing at her skin, whistles chasing her through the trees. She swore she heard them behind her, their footsteps uneven but fast, gaining ground as she stumbled through the dark. At one point, she looked back and saw them, pale figures moving unnaturally, their limbs too long, their heads jerking side to side. By dawn, Claire reached a logging road, where a truck driver found her and rushed her to safety. Authorities quietly dismissed her testimony as the hallucinations of a traumatized mind, but those who heard her story knew better. Her scars, her fear, her refusal to go near the mountains again. These were not fantasies. Claire had escaped what so many others could not. But her survival carried a chilling warning. She insisted the family wasn't just hiding in Hollow's End. They were watching, waiting, and they would never stop. Today, Hollow's End sits in silence, swallowed by the Appalachian forest. The mines are long sealed, the houses collapsing into the earth, and yet the family's shadow lingers. Officially, the sheriff's department lists dozens of missing persons as lost hikers or unresolved cases. Unofficially, locals know the truth. Hollow's End is cursed ground, and the family who married each other still walks the mountains. Travelers who dare to enter sometimes report strange sightings, crude symbols freshly carved into trees, abandoned shoes left in the dirt. And once, a hunter swore he saw pale figures crouched in the distance, watching before they slipped back into the woods. The legend has grown so dark that even seasoned outdoorsmen refuse to tread too close. The hollow takes people, they say, and it doesn't give them back. Stories of the family have warped into folklore, creatures with human faces but animal instincts, an inbred clan that feeds on the lost, or even demons masquerading as men. But those who know the real history understand that no myth can compare to the truth. This wasn't the work of ghosts. It was people. A family so twisted by isolation, by blood, and by violence that they became something worse than monsters. They became predators wearing human skin. Some believe the clan is dead, wiped out by their own sickness and hunger. Others insist they adapted, retreating deeper underground, breeding in caves and forgotten mines where no sunlight reaches. A few even claim the whistles still echo in the valley, high-pitched calls drifting through the trees at night, circling anyone foolish enough to listen. To this day, State troopers occasionally report finding crude shelters or hidden camps, long abandoned, but unsettlingly recent. The Hollow still keeps its secrets. And perhaps that is the most disturbing truth of all. The family was never caught. They simply vanished. Their bloodline may still be out there, wandering, waiting, watching from the tree line as hikers pass unaware. If you ever find yourself in the Appalachian Mountains, and you hear a whistle that seems to come from nowhere, do not answer. Do not linger. Do not look back. Because in those dark hills, the family who married each other may still be hunting. And if they find you, there will be no escape.